In this class, we will begin to learn about cascading style sheets, commonly known as CSS. This is a separate language that runs alongside of HTML, and CSS describes how the HTML elements are to be displayed on the screen. It also can be used to describe how the web page will be displayed on paper, for example, if you were to print it, or in other media such as smaller devices. By using CSS, we can save time and energy because we can use the same CSS rules on all of our pages, which also enables consistency in our website. CSS rules are applied several different ways. They could be applied inline, which means they are written inside the HTML element, embedded, which means they are placed inside the head section, or external, meaning they are in a separate file and connected to the web page using the link element. We will cover external style sheets later. In order to apply a style, you need to indicate where that style is being applied to. In CSS, we have what are called selectors. The selector indicates where the style is being applied. We have element selectors, which will be the primary focus in this video. Later, we will look at ID, class, and other types of selectors. When you apply a CSS rule or declaration, it follows a certain syntax. You will indicate the selector to which that rule or declaration is being applied to, and the rules or declarations will be enclosed in the curly braces. The syntax is property : value. So we have CSS properties, and most of the values that property can take are also set in the language. However, some are user-defined, such as a color that you might want to use for your text color. You can write these across or down. You can have spaces to the left or right of the semicolon. The choice is yours. However, I always advise being consistent. In CSS, we work with two types of font families. We work with the basic fonts, which have names such as Times New Roman, Courier, Arial, and we can also work with the generic family name, such as serif, sans serif, cursive, fantasy, and monospace. So if I were to go to a very good resource, W3 Schools, here I can see an example of how the font family property is being used. This is the only property that allows us to set multiple values. And when you're working with fonts, you do not know what font might be on the user's computer. Therefore, you might want to choose a second and third choice. Whenever the font name has more than one word, it will be enclosed in quotations. Here again, this is the only time you will ever see quotations in your CSS syntax. So here I would choose Times New Roman as my first choice, Times as my second choice, and a generic serif font, meaning whatever the default font is on the user's computer. Serif fonts have these little pointy edges. And here we see some commonly used serif fonts. Serif fonts work better on the printed page rather than on the computer screen. We generally work with sans serif fonts on the computer. As you can see, there are no pointy edges here, and they seem to work better. Here is an example of a cursive font. And here are some examples of monospace fonts where every letter occupies the same amount of space. You will see web developers using Google-hosted fonts. And here is an example on the web page, a very commonly used font, Roboto. And if I were to choose this and click See Specimen, it shows me what all the characters look like. If I were to choose this font, A dialog box launches and it shows me how I can use this. I would need to embed the reference on the Google site using the link tag. Technically, this would be an external style sheet, and here is how I would code it in my CSS. So for more information, you can visit the guide on this page. In CSS, we commonly use colors. We can use a color for our text, for the entire background, or for any HTML element as the background. There are several ways of expressing a color value in CSS. You can use the color name, and that is a standard color name. You can use the hexadecimal value, which consists of 6 characters, numbers from 0 to 9, letters from A to F. Although it doesn't matter whether they're uppercase or lowercase, I generally use lowercase. Whenever you are using 6 characters of the same, you can shorten that to 3. You will commonly see web developers doing that. We can also use what are called RGB values, and this stands for red, green, blue. These colors range from 0 to 255 points in value, depending on the amount of that color they contain. And you would specify the value in the parentheses separated by commas. We can also use HSL values, which stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. They are represented by both numbers and percents. In CSS, we also have the ability to use opacity values, which ranges from 0 to 1, 0 being 100% transparent, 1 being opaque. And we can use that opacity value with our RGBA and SLA color values, thereby making them transparent to an extent. So we would add the A, the opacity, which is also referred to as an alpha channel, at the end of our RGB triplet. W3 Schools has some excellent resources for you to learn more about colors, and there are a lot of resources on the internet with color charts and color conversion tools. So here we see an example of 5 different colors and their color name listed. Here we see 3 different colors with their RGB values listed. Here we see 3 different colors with both their hexadecimal values and RGB values listed. And here we see some more commonly used color names. And these names need to be spelled correctly. When we work with CSS, we also have different units of measure. So if we were to be working with a font, we would need to set what size that font is. The default browser font size is 16 pixels. In CSS, we can express units of measure in millimeters, centimeters, inches, points, picas, and pixels. There are 72 points to an inch and 72 pixels to an inch. Pixels are generally used for our common units of measure when we need to specify width, height, borders, margins, etc., as it corresponds nicely to the computer screen. We also have relative units, meaning they adjust proportionally to either the computer screen or the container in which they are placed in. These units are the EM unit, a percentage, and in CSS we have some relative keywords such as larger or large, smaller or small. EM units are commonly used as they scale nicely on larger screens and mobile devices. The W3C also provides a very nice validation service where you can validate your CSS, and I advise you to take advantage of this.